The Oak Ridge Estates sign gleamed in the autumn sunlight as I turned our sedan into what would become our new neighborhood. The streets were lined with mature maple trees exploding with red and gold leaves, creating a picture-perfect canopy above the immaculately maintained homes. I glanced at my daughter Lily in the rearview mirror. She had her face pressed against the window, her eyes wide with excitement. "What do you think of our new home, sweetheart?" I asked, navigating the winding streets toward our new address. "It is beautiful, Dad. Look at all the trees. Do you think there will be other kids here?" Lily asked, her voice filled with hope that made my heart ache. "I am certain there will be plenty of kids who will be lucky to have you as their friend," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The move had been difficult for both of us after losing her mother to cancer last year, but the police department transfer offered higher pay and better resources for Lily's ongoing physical therapy. I pulled into the driveway of our modest two-story home. It was not the largest on the block, but with its welcoming front porch and manageable yard, it was perfect for us. Lily waited patiently as I came around to help her out of the car. Her mobility had improved tremendously over the past year, but the leg braces she wore since her diagnosis of juvenile idiopathic arthritis still made certain movements challenging. As I helped her stand, she gripped my arms for support, finding her balance before taking her first steps toward our new home. The metal of her leg braces caught the sunlight. I had never been more proud of her determination. "Do you want to do the honors?" I asked, holding out the house key to her. Lily nodded enthusiastically, taking the key with determination. We made our way up the walkway together, Lily moving carefully but confidently. The sound of a lawnmower shut off nearby, and a middle-aged man waved at us from across the street. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he called out, placing his gardening gloves in his back pocket as he crossed toward us. "Tom Jensen," he said, extending his hand to me. "My wife Laura and I live just across the way. We saw the moving truck yesterday." "James Davis," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "And this is my daughter, Lily." Tom crouched down slightly to meet Lily at eye level, showing a consideration that immediately endeared him to me. "Well, hello there, Lily. My grandson Max lives 2 doors down and visits on weekends. He is about your age. I bet you two would get along great." Lily smiled shyly but genuinely. It was her first real smile in weeks. As we chatted with Tom, I noticed a woman standing on a porch 3 houses down. Unlike the other neighbors who had casually waved or nodded welcomingly, she observed us with an analytical stare. Her blonde hair was styled in a perfect bob, not a strand out of place despite the light breeze. Her arms were crossed as she surveyed us from a distance. "Who is that?" I asked Tom quietly, nodding subtly in her direction. Tom's friendly expression faltered slightly. "That is Patricia Montgomery. She is the HOA president, takes the job very seriously indeed." I nodded, making a mental note. In my years as a police officer, I had learned to read people, and something about Patricia's demeanor sent a slight warning signal. But I dismissed it. This was our fresh start, and I was not about to let anything dampen our spirits. That evening, as Lily and I ate pizza amid half-unpacked boxes in our new kitchen, a knock came at the door. A smiling couple stood there with a homemade lasagna and a welcome card signed by several neighbors. More followed. A retired teacher brought fresh cookies. A young couple with twins offered local school information, and an elderly man brought over a list of the best local services from plumbers to pediatricians. I sat on our new porch that night after putting Lily to bed, looking out at the peaceful street. Despite the challenges of the move and Lily's condition, for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. What I did not realize then was that Beneath this perfect suburban facade lurked troubles I was wholly unprepared for, threats no police academy had trained me to handle. The welcome basket arrived 3 days after we moved in. It contained a jar of local honey, artisanal bread, and a 3-inch thick binder labeled Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association Guidelines and Regulations. The basket was delivered personally by Patricia Montgomery, who insisted I call her Mrs. Montgomery rather than Patricia or Pat. Her smile remained firmly in place as she handed me the binder. We find it best that new residents familiarize themselves with our community standards immediately, she explained, her voice carrying a sweetness that did not reach her eyes. Violations can result in fines starting at $50 and increasing with each occurrence. The Architectural Review Committee meets on the first Tuesday of each month if you plan any exterior modifications. I thanked her politely, expecting her to leave after the delivery. Instead, she peered past me into the foyer where some of Lily's medical equipment was temporarily stored. "You will want to ensure none of that is visible from the street," she commented. Section 12, Paragraph 3 of the guidelines clearly states that medical equipment must be stored out of public view at all times. Before I could respond, she had already turned to leave, her heels clicking precisely on the walkway as she departed. I closed the door slowly, the heavy binder feeling suddenly more ominous than informative. That evening, I flipped through the HOA guidelines while Lily did her physical therapy exercises in the living room. The determination on her face as she stretched her leg muscles always inspired me. Her physical therapist had given us a rigorous home exercise regimen to complement her bi-weekly professional sessions. "Does it hurt today?" I asked, noticing her wince during a particular stretch. "Not bad," Lily replied, her voice strained but resolved. "Ms. Johnson says if I keep working, I might need the full braces less by summer." I nodded encouragingly, though we both knew juvenile arthritis was unpredictable. Some days were better than others, but Lily never complained. Not once since her diagnosis 3 years ago. The HOA guidelines were astonishingly comprehensive. 42 approved mailbox designs, 16 acceptable exterior paint color schemes, 12 permitted grass seed varieties, rules governing everything from holiday decoration timing to the maximum height of garden gnomes. I closed the binder, feeling a growing sense of claustrophobia at the level of control exerted over what I had thought would be our sanctuary. The first violation notice came exactly 1 week after we moved in. A bright orange paper affixed to our door detailed our infraction: garbage bins visible from the street outside of designated collection times. The fine was $75, with a warning that second offenses doubled in price. I stared at the notice in disbelief. Our garbage bins had been placed at the curb the night before trash day, just as the city guidelines recommended. I flipped back through the HOA binder and found the relevant section. Bins could only be placed out after 7 p.m. the evening before collection and must be removed by 10 a.m. the day of collection. We had put ours out at 6:30 p.m. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center, a colonial-style building at the entrance to the subdivision. I arrived early, wanting to contest the ridiculous fine. The room was arranged like a courtroom, with a raised table at the front where the board members sat. Patricia, Mrs. Montgomery, occupied the center seat, a gavel placed precisely before her. The meeting proceeded with military precision. Each agenda item was addressed and decided with minimal discussion. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I raised my hand and approached the microphone. "I would like to contest the garbage bin violation issued to 45 Maple Drive," I stated calmly. The bins were placed out only 30 minutes before the allowed time. Mrs. Montgomery looked down at me over her reading glasses. Rules exist for a reason, Mr. Davis. Consistency in enforcement is vital to maintaining our property values and community aesthetics. The violation stands. The matter was closed without further discussion. As I returned to my seat, I noticed several residents avoiding eye contact with me, as if association with a rule breaker might be contagious. After the meeting, as residents filtered out, an elderly gentleman named Walter Abernathy touched my elbow gently. "Might I have a word with you outside?" he asked quietly. Once in the parking lot, Walter spoke in hushed tones. "I noticed you got on Patricia's radar already. Word of advice, keep your head down. She has driven 3 families out of the neighborhood in the past 2 years, families who did not fit her vision for Oak Ridge." "What do you mean by her vision?" I asked. Walter glanced around before answering. "Patricia targets certain households, usually those she considers problematic or different. The Ramirez family with their 5 children, the Hendersons with their autistic son, the elderly widow Chen who could not keep up with lawn maintenance after her husband died, all gone within months of becoming the focus of her attention." I thanked Walter for the warning, but inwardly dismissed his concerns as neighborhood drama. As a police officer, I had handled genuinely dangerous situations. How threatening could a neighborhood busybody with a rule book really be? I would soon learn the answer to that question, and it would change everything about our new life in Oak Ridge Estates. The violations began appearing with alarming frequency. A notice for wind chimes that exceeded the permitted decibel level, a citation for planting marigolds that were not on the approved flower list, a warning about our garden hose being improperly coiled when not in use. Each infraction came with increasing fines that were automatically added to our HOA dues. One Tuesday afternoon, I arrived home from my shift at the police department to find Lily watching through the living room window with concern. "Dad, that lady has been taking pictures of our house for 10 minutes, she said, pointing toward the street. I joined her at the window and saw Mrs. Montgomery standing on the public sidewalk, a professional camera with a telephoto lens aimed directly at our home. I stepped outside immediately. "Mrs. Montgomery, may I ask what you are doing?" I kept my voice calm and professional, the same tone I used when approaching suspicious persons during patrol. She lowered the camera but showed no embarrassment at being caught. "Documenting violations for the HOA records. Your garden hose is visible from the street, and I noticed medical equipment through your front window." I felt a flash of anger but maintained my composure. "The medical equipment belongs to my daughter. She needs it for her physical therapy." "That is unfortunate," she replied without a trace of sympathy. "But Section 12 is quite clear about visible medical equipment. Perhaps you should consider using your basement or garage for her exercises." "My daughter has a right to do her physical therapy in our living room," I responded, my police training the only thing keeping my tone measured. "And Oak Ridge residents have a right to maintain aesthetic standards," she countered smoothly. "You agreed to these conditions when you purchased your home." The most troubling incident came when construction on our approved wheelchair ramp began. After Lily's particularly difficult therapy session, her orthopedist recommended having a small ramp installed at our side entrance for days when the stairs proved too challenging. I had submitted the architectural modification request with detailed plans, received written approval, and hired a contractor. The concrete foundation had just been poured when a stop work order appeared, affixed to a stake in our yard. The notice claimed the ramp dimensions violated HOA guidelines, despite being identical to those in our approved plans. The contractor showed me the original approval letter, then the stop work order. "I cannot continue until this is resolved," he apologized. "These HOA disputes can get contractors blacklisted in the area." That weekend, the neighborhood hosted a community barbecue in the common area park. Lily had been looking forward to meeting more children her age, and I hoped to build connections with neighbors beyond the increasingly tense HOA interactions. We had just filled our plates when Mrs. Montgomery approached us, speaking loudly enough for nearby residents to hear. "Mr. Davis, I noticed you have not addressed the visual pollution situation we discussed. Medical equipment clearly visible through your front windows creates an unwelcoming atmosphere for visitors and prospective buyers." Several conversations around us halted. Lily shrunk against my side, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Those are my leg braces and therapy equipment," Lily said softly, surprising me with her courage. "I need them to walk better." Mrs. Montgomery barely glanced at Lily. Children should be taught that community standards benefit everyone. Perhaps if your father explained the importance of neighborhood aesthetics, you would understand why such items should be kept private. I placed my hand protectively on Lily's shoulder. "My daughter understands consideration for others perfectly well. Her equipment stays where it belongs, in our home, accessible when she needs it." The confrontation left a pall over what should have been an enjoyable afternoon. As we prepared to leave early, Rebecca Winters, a nurse who lived 2 streets over, approached us. "I could not help overhearing," she said quietly. "You are not the first family with medical needs to face this kind of treatment. The Landons moved out last year after their son returned from military service with a prosthetic leg. Mrs. Montgomery made their lives miserable over his rehabilitation equipment." "The Landons on Sycamore Court?" I asked, recalling Walter's earlier warning. Rebecca nodded, and before them the Steins, whose daughter had cystic fibrosis, and the Farrells, whose son used a wheelchair, all gone within a year of moving in. That evening, after putting Lily to bed, I sat at my kitchen table researching the families Rebecca had mentioned. Property records confirmed what she had told me: 3 families with members who had disabilities or medical conditions, all sold their homes within 6-12 months of purchase, all at prices below market value. A pattern was emerging, and my police instincts were now fully engaged. This was not random harassment or overzealous rule enforcement. This was systematic discrimination disguised as community standards. As I looked at the growing pile of violation notices, I felt my professional perception shift. I was no longer simply an annoyed homeowner dealing with a difficult HOA president. I was a law enforcement officer recognizing a pattern of civil rights violations. What had begun as an inconvenience was revealing itself as something far more sinister, and it was about to get much worse. Dark clouds gathered overhead as I left for my shift that Thursday. The forecast called for afternoon thunderstorms, and I considered driving Lily to school instead of letting her take the bus, but she insisted she would be fine. "I am 12 now, Dad," she reminded me, adjusting her leg braces under her jeans. "And Dr. Mitchell says I need to maintain independence." I relented, making her promise to call immediately if the rain started before she got home from school. Lily had been working so hard in physical therapy. Her determination to strengthen her legs and reduce her dependence on the braces was inspiring. As a single father, I constantly battled between protecting her and encouraging her hard-won independence. My shift that day was particularly challenging. A multi-car accident on the highway kept me longer than expected. Dark storm clouds had opened up by the time I was driving home, rain pounding against my windshield as I navigated the flooded streets toward Oak Ridge Estates. Turning onto our street, my heart nearly stopped. Through the curtain of rain, I could make out two figures in my front yard, one standing tall with an umbrella, the other kneeling in the grass, hunched against the downpour. As I drew closer, their identities became clear. Mrs. Montgomery standing over my daughter, who was kneeling in the mud beside our garden path. I pulled into the driveway and rushed out without bothering to grab my jacket. The rain immediately soaked through my uniform as I approached them. "What is going on here?" I demanded, my voice carrying over the storm. Mrs. Montgomery turned calmly toward me, her umbrella shielding only herself from the rain. "Your daughter was correcting a violation. This decorative stone is not on the approved list of garden ornaments." The stone in question was a small, hand-painted river rock memorializing my late mother, Lily's grandmother. We had placed it beside my mother's favorite variety of roses that we had planted along our garden path. Lily remained kneeling in the mud, her jeans soaked through, her hands trembling as she tried to lift the stone. The metal of her leg braces was clearly visible now, her pants clinging to them in the rain. Her face was contorted with pain and effort. She insisted she could not bend down to remove it, Mrs. Montgomery continued. I explained that rules apply to everyone, regardless of personal circumstances. I rushed to Lily, helping her to her feet. Her legs buckled immediately, unable to support her weight after being forced to kneel for what must have been several minutes. Her braces were caked with mud, and she was shivering violently. "How long has she been out here?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet as I supported Lily's weight. "I came by 20 minutes ago to point out the violation. She said you were not home and she would handle it." Mrs. Montgomery's tone suggested she had done nothing wrong, that enforcing garden ornament regulations on a disabled child in a thunderstorm was perfectly reasonable behavior. I lifted Lily into my arms, her body frighteningly cold against mine. "Get off my property, now." Mrs. Montgomery seemed unperturbed by my anger. "The stone needs to be removed by tomorrow morning, or a $150 fine will be assessed." I carried Lily inside, not bothering to respond further. Her teeth were chattering as I helped her out of her soaked clothes and into a warm bath. The full extent of what had happened became clearer as I examined her legs. The skin around her braces was raw and inflamed, the muscles spasming painfully from being forced into the kneeling position. "She would not let me stand up, Dad," Lily whispered, tears mixing with the bathwater. "I told her about my braces, but she said rules have to apply to everyone the same way." That night, after Lily had finally fallen asleep with the help of pain medication, I sat at our kitchen table, a cold rage building inside me. No longer was this about petty rules or neighborhood aesthetics. Mrs. Montgomery had physically harmed my child, deliberately forced her into a position that caused her pain despite knowing about her disability. The next morning, I took Lily to her orthopedist, Dr. Mitchell, who confirmed my worst fears. "She has had a significant setback," he explained grimly, reviewing the inflammation around her knee joints. "The forced kneeling position has aggravated her condition. We will need to adjust her therapy regimen, possibly increase the upward level of her braces temporarily." What exactly happened? I explained the situation, watching Dr. Mitchell's expression grow increasingly concerned. "You understand this could constitute abuse of a disabled minor," he said quietly. "As a mandated reporter, I should note this incident." "I understand," I replied. And as her father and a police officer, I intend to address it. That evening, after settling Lily with ice packs and her favorite movies, I withdrew my police notepad from my work bag. For years, I had used this pad to document crimes, take witness statements, and build cases against those who violated the law. Now, I was using it for a different purpose, to methodically document a pattern of discrimination, harassment, and now physical harm directed at my disabled daughter. I listed every incident, every violation notice, every interaction with Mrs. Montgomery. I noted dates, times, witnesses, and specific HOA regulations cited. What emerged was not a series of random rule enforcements, but a calculated campaign targeting vulnerable residents. My hands, which had trembled with rage earlier, were now perfectly steady. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute to be endured. This was a case to be investigated. And Patricia Montgomery had just made a critical mistake. She had harmed the child of a police officer who knew exactly how to build a case that would stand up to scrutiny. The detective in me had awakened, and justice was about to be served. My dining room transformed into an investigation headquarters over the next 2 weeks. Evidence boards lined the walls. Color-coded sticky notes connected related incidents, and stacks of documents grew as I applied police methodology to what I now recognized as a civil rights case. While Lily recovered from her setback, spending extra hours in physical therapy to regain her progress, I channeled my anger into methodical investigation. My years in law enforcement had taught me that emotion clouds judgment, but strategic thinking delivers justice. My first step was legal research. I spent nights after Lily went to bed studying the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. I highlighted relevant sections regarding discrimination against persons with disabilities in housing and community settings. To my growing outrage, I discovered that nearly 30% of Oak Ridge Estate's HOA guidelines potentially violated federal accessibility laws. The regulations prohibiting visible medical equipment, restrictions on home modifications like ramps, rules against non-standard mobility devices in common areas. Each policy created barriers for residents with disabilities, barriers that federal law explicitly prohibited. I began searching property records for the neighborhood, creating a timeline of home sales over the past 5 years. A pattern emerged. 8 families with members who had visible disabilities or medical needs had purchased homes in Oak Ridge. All 8 had sold their properties within 18 months, most at losses of 10–20% below market value. The exodus could not be coincidental. I needed first-hand accounts. I am investigating a potential pattern of discrimination in Oak Ridge Estates, I explained on the phone to Michael Farrell, whose family had sold their home a year earlier. I identified myself as both a current resident and a police officer. Michael's relief at someone finally taking action was palpable. Our son Jacob uses a wheelchair. We needed to widen doorways and install a ramp. The HOA approved the plans, then found irregularities after construction began. The fines were crippling, $200 per day for unauthorized modifications. His story matched what had happened with our ramp. I recorded his statement, obtaining permission to use it if needed. Over the next week, I contacted all 8 families. Their experiences were disturbingly similar. Initial welcome followed by escalating harassment centered around their disabilities or medical equipment. Several agreed to provide written statements describing their experiences. Mrs. Montgomery told us directly that certain types of residents lowered property values, Sarah Stein told me, her voice still bearing traces of hurt 2 years later. When my daughter's medical equipment became visible through our window, violations appeared daily. While building this evidence, I also examined HOA financial records, which were theoretically available to all residents. The treasurer, a nervous accountant named Howard Fletcher, initially resisted providing complete documentation. "I need to see where violation fines are being allocated," I insisted, using my most authoritative professional tone. "That information is typically reviewed only at the annual meeting," Howard hedged. "As a homeowner, I have a legal right to examine financial records," I countered. "I can make this request formally through an attorney if necessary." The financial records revealed the most damning evidence yet. Violation fines, nearly $47,000 collected over the past 3 years, had been channeled into landscape contracts with Montgomery Exterior Solutions. Further research confirmed this company was owned by Mrs. Montgomery's brother-in-law. More concerning were discrepancies between approved expenditures and actual disbursements. Projects approved by the board showed completed payments, but several residents confirmed the work was never performed or only partially completed. I created a spreadsheet tracking the money trail, highlighting clear conflicts of interest and potential misappropriation of funds. This was no longer just discrimination, it was financial misconduct. The most challenging evidence to gather involved selective enforcement. I spent evenings systematically photographing homes throughout the neighborhood, documenting dozens of violations identical to those for which my family had been cited. Garden hoses visible from the street, unapproved plantings, decorative items not on the approved list. The pattern was unmistakable. Homes belonging to board members or their friends had multiple visible violations without consequences. Meanwhile, families like mine received notices for identical issues, often within hours of the violation occurring. "Do you realize what you are building here?" Rebecca Winters asked one evening when she stopped by to check on Lily's recovery. As a nurse, she had been horrified by the kneeling incident and had become a valuable ally. "A civil rights case," I replied, showing her the evidence boards. "More than that," she said, surveying the organized documentation. "You are exposing systematic discrimination that has driven families from their homes. This could have implications beyond just Oak Ridge." Rebecca introduced me to her brother, a civil rights attorney who specialized in housing discrimination. He reviewed my evidence with growing interest. "This is an exceptionally well-built case," he commented. "Most housing discrimination is subtle and difficult to prove, but you have documented a clear pattern targeting families with disabilities, combined with financial impropriety and selective enforcement. Multiple federal laws have potentially been violated here." He advised me on additional evidence to gather and how to structure my case for maximum impact. With his guidance, I compiled a comprehensive report documenting every violation of the Fair Housing Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, and state anti-discrimination laws. Throughout this process, I maintained a calm, professional demeanor during any interactions with Mrs. Montgomery or the HOA board. When new violation notices appeared, and they continued to arrive weekly, I simply documented them and added them to my evidence. Lily noticed the transformation in my approach. "You are not angry anymore," she observed one evening as I organized documents. "Not angry," I corrected her. "Focused, there is a difference." "Like when you are working on a big case?" she asked. I nodded. "Exactly like that, and this might be the most important case of my career." As my investigation neared completion, I prepared for the confrontation that would inevitably follow. This would not be a heated exchange or emotional outburst. It would be something far more devastating to someone like Patricia Montgomery, a methodical, evidence-based dismantling of the authority she had abused for years. Justice was coming to Oak Ridge Estates, and it would arrive with the full force of federal law behind it. The flyers appeared on every door in Oak Ridge Estates exactly 17 days after the incident with Lily. Printed on official-looking letterhead, they announced a special HOA meeting to address urgent community concerns regarding compliance and financial matters. Attendance was strongly encouraged, with a note that issues affecting all homeowners' property values and legal standing will be discussed. I had carefully crafted the wording to ensure maximum attendance without revealing my true purpose. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening when most residents would be available. The location, our community center, was familiar territory for Mrs. Montgomery, giving her a false sense of security. In the days leading up to the meeting, I made final preparations. I compiled my evidence into a professional presentation with clear visual aids demonstrating the patterns of discrimination. I arranged for representatives from the County Housing Authority and ADA Compliance Office to attend as concerned citizens. Most importantly, I coordinated with several former residents who agreed to return and share their experiences. When Thursday evening arrived, Lily squeezed my hand before I left for the meeting. "Get justice, Dad," she said simply. The community center was packed when I arrived, nearly every homeowner in attendance, a far cry from the usual sparse turnout for monthly meetings. Mrs. Montgomery, and the board members sat at their elevated table at the front, looking mildly confused by the unprecedented attendance. I entered last, accompanied by Rebecca Winters and two officials whose credentials remained temporarily anonymous. We took seats in the back row as Mrs. Montgomery called the meeting to order with her customary gavel tap. "Before we address the agenda items," she began, "I must express concern about the unauthorized meeting notice distributed this week. The board did not approve." "Point of order," I interrupted, standing up. "According to HOA bylaws, Section 4.3, any homeowner may call a special meeting to address community concerns with proper notice, which was provided." Mrs. Montgomery's mouth tightened. "Mr. Davis, we follow specific protocols in these meetings." "Indeed we do," I replied, walking toward the front of the room. "Protocols, rules, and laws, all of which will be central to tonight's discussion." I reached the podium and placed my badge on the table, not aggressively, but visibly. A murmur ran through the crowd. While most neighbors knew I was a police officer, seeing the badge in this context shifted the atmosphere immediately. For those who do not know me, I am James Davis, homeowner at 45 Maple Drive and detective with the County Police Department. I have called this meeting to address a pattern of systematic discrimination and financial irregularities within our HOA. Mrs. Montgomery's face paled slightly. "This is highly inappropriate. If you have concerns, they should be submitted in writing to the board." "My concerns have been thoroughly documented," I replied calmly, connecting my laptop to the projector. "And they relate to federal civil rights violations that affect every homeowner in this room." The first slide appeared, a timeline showing the 8 families with disabilities who had been driven from the neighborhood, alongside the violation notices they had received. Over the past 3 years, Oak Ridge Estates has exhibited a pattern of discriminatory enforcement targeting homeowners with disabilities and medical needs. This practice violates the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and multiple state laws. For the next 20 minutes, I presented meticulously organized evidence. Photographs showing identical violations treated differently depending on who owned the property. Financial records revealing the flow of fine money to companies connected to board members. Side-by-side comparisons of HOA regulations against federal accessibility laws they violated. Mrs. Montgomery attempted to interrupt several times, but each time I calmly referenced specific bylaws or legal statutes that gave me the right to continue. Her authority diminished with each failed interjection. The most powerful moment came when I introduced my concerned citizens, revealing them as housing authority and ADA compliance officials who had reviewed my evidence. Based on the documentation Detective Davis has compiled, the housing authority representative stated, there appear to be serious violations that warrant formal investigation. Discriminatory housing practices carry potential penalties of up to $100,000 per incident. Mrs. Montgomery's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. We enforce rules equally. If certain people cannot comply with community standards, perhaps they should live elsewhere. Her words hung in the shocked silence, confirming everything my investigation had suggested. People like my daughter, I asked quietly. A child with juvenile arthritis who was forced to kneel in the rain despite her leg braces. Would you like to clarify that statement for the record? Before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Walter Abernathy stood up from his seat. Mrs. Montgomery told me I could not install a handrail on my front steps after my hip replacement, he said, his elderly voice quavering but determined. She said it would advertise infirmity to visitors. His testimony broke the dam. One by one, current residents began standing, sharing their own experiences of selective enforcement and intimidation. My son was not allowed to use his adaptive tricycle on the sidewalk. We were fined because my mother's oxygen tank was visible through our window. Our application for a first-floor bedroom conversion was denied when they learned it was for medical reasons. The community I thought had been silently complicit had actually been silently suffering. As testimony after testimony emerged, the power dynamic in the room shifted dramatically. Mrs. Montgomery no longer controlled the narrative. The very rules and authority she had weaponized against vulnerable residents were now being used to hold her accountable. Justice had arrived at Oak Ridge Estates, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with irrefutable evidence and the collective courage of a community finally finding its voice. The emergency board meeting was called for the following evening. With the evidence publicly presented and housing authorities formally involved, the remaining board members moved quickly to distance themselves from the impending legal consequences. The vote to remove Patricia Montgomery from her position as HOA president was unanimous. I watched from the back row as she was escorted from the community center, her carefully maintained facade finally cracked, revealing the small, angry person beneath. There was no satisfaction in her humiliation, only relief that her ability to harm vulnerable residents had ended. The legal consequences unfolded gradually over the following weeks. The County Housing Authority opened a formal investigation into discriminatory practices. The district attorney reviewed evidence of financial misconduct for potential criminal charges. Former residents consulted attorneys about civil damages for being forced from their homes. But the true transformation came in the healing of our community.